I'm incredibly pleased today to be chairing the seminar titled Mountain Tales, Love and Loss in the Municipality of Castaway Belongings, which is part of our Inequalities seminar series. Today's speaker is author Saumya Roy, and she'll discuss her new book, Mountain Tales, which explores the noxious and wonderful world of maximum cities rising, mountains of garbage, and the waste pickers who trawl through them. Saumya will be in conversation with today's discussant, Dr. George Kunnath, about the truths that are unraveled through the stories of this small, forgotten, and marginalized community that lives and works among Mumbai's castaway belongings. Saumya will be in conversation with George Kunnath a little after her talk, but I also want to tell you that her book has met with wide praise and excellent reviews. Kiran Desai, the Booker Prize-winning author of The Inheritance of Loss, has this to say: Roy has a journalist's unflinching eye, a poet's talent for detail, and a radical sense of empathy. Saumya also has a really interesting background. She's a journalist and an activist in Mumbai. She's written for several magazines and newspapers like Ford's India Magazine, The Wire, The Outlook. In 2010, she co-founded the Vandana Foundation to support the livelihoods of Mumbai's poorest micro-entrepreneurs by giving small, low-interest loans. Mountain Tales is the first book that she's published by Profile in 2021. Please note that you can order this book from our official LSE events page, the independent bookshop, using the link posted in the chat below. I'm now going to introduce to you our discussant for today, Dr. George Kunnath, a social anthropologist and research fellow at the III. For the longest time, George has been working on Dalit and Adivasi communities amidst Maoist insurgency and has a fascinating monograph on this subject by Routledge Press, London, 2017. Finally, some formalities about today's seminar. As the event is on Zoom rather than a webinar format, we can see our audience and have a far more interactive event. May I ask all of you to remain muted throughout, but keep your videos on as usual. There'll be a chance for you to later ask questions in the Q&A. And a very quick mention of our upcoming events at the III. Next week at this time, Tuesday, the 15th of February, there'll be another seminar. And the link to this event, along with our other upcoming events, can be found in the chat. So I'll now hand you over to Saumya, and many, many thanks to all of you who have joined us today, and do enjoy the event. Thank you, Saumya. Over to you.
Thank you very much for having me here. My thanks to Dr. Figuera and everyone at the LSE Institute for having me here. I've very much been looking forward to this occasion to speak here because my book is about the garbage mountains of Mumbai, which I see as a manifestation of inequality, being made as they are of India's discarded wealth and sustaining those left behind by it. I remember my very first trip to the garbage mountains of Deonar nearly a decade ago. Waste pickers from there had begun asking us for the loans that I gave through a small non-profit I ran. Surprised and skeptical at their business of picking trash to resell and so their ability to repay our loans, I asked Vidabai Kamble, a long-time waste picker, to take me to see this place she worked at. That afternoon, we felt the sweltering summer sun burn against us as we walked up the steep incline of the garbage mountains. Strewn below us was shiny foil, burlap sacks mingled with mud, children's clothes, wire, tablet strips, and plastic bottles. Packed tightly with mud, these thrown-away things made Deonar's mountains. A string of such mountains form the edge of the island city of Mumbai, and from the peaks, I watched the sea curve around them. The mountains rose as high as 20-floor buildings made of trash and were spread over more than 300 acres. To me, they were a symbol of India's economic growth and rising consumption. The towering garbage mountains provided me a wonderful lens through which to look at inequality. Those who create these mountains, the waste pickers who live off the city's dregs, and the policymakers who struggle to move them. They are from the British period, Vitabai had told me that afternoon, beaming with pride at the man-made mountains that stretched around us. I later read in colonial archives that Mumbai's landfill was created here more than 125 years ago, with the thought that the city's trash would fill up this then swampy marsh, making it fertile, taking the city's trash out of sight, and with it the plague it had then helped spread. The marsh had not only filled, but risen to mounds and then hills with the city's waste over the decades. India's economic rise since the 1990s had turned the hills into these teetering mountains, into a monument to modern consumption. Instead of the food and fruit that came in earlier times and that degraded slowly to make soil fertile, the growth had brought less degradable waste here. Plastic boxes, gadgets, diapers, styrofoam cups, injectables that made the mountains higher and didn't degrade. As I write in my book, the expendability of such things provided a new thrill, even in families that had taken pride in passing things down the generations. Modern growth came from constantly consuming and throwing away. Deonar, like garbage mountains elsewhere in the world, had been made to house the city's waste, to keep it out of sight, to keep its smells away. The waste pickers were the only ones who took anything away from the garbage mountains to be reshaped and remade anew. The waste pickers too had been settled around Deonar's edges to stay at the far edge of the gleaming city, staying just out of the reach of the city's amenities, however far they stretched. Cities with first world dreams grew by creating certain kinds of jobs and keeping the poor out of sight. Like many cities, the inequitable and unsustainable nature of Mumbai's growth was meant to see unseen and unfelt, even as its towers rose. The rich were getting richer, the poor are more invisible. But as the garbage mountains grew, they became a source of fires, smoke, pollution, and ill health, not only among the waste pickers who trawled them, but traveling further, the smoke would only travel further to sicken wealthier Mumbai residents. Eventually, epic fires had burned on them through the early months of 2016, creating smoke and ill health all over the city. It brought the so far unseen mountains into the city's consciousness more than a century after they were made. I argue in my book that such mountains, symbols of inequality, survive and grow by us who make these mountains, not seeing them. Not in my backyard is a popular term that suggests garbage, pollution, and ensuing ill health are fine as long as they don't affect wealthier residents of cities. But such mountains and seemingly distant backyards are never so distant. They often erupt in fires and smoke that sicken waste pickers, but also others who live nearby. Life expectancy around Deonar's garbage mountains was 39 years, or less than half that of other Indians in 2009, and has not risen by much, recent records show. Garbage mountains emit methane, carbon dioxide, and other greenhouse-causing gases that affect temperatures across the world. Mumbai and India are not alone in making these mountains, in fact. Indians consume less than a tenth of what Britons consume and throw away every day. British waste not only fills incinerators within the country, but is also exported to Turkey, India, Malaysia, Thailand, and other East Asian countries. Some of it burns in incinerators there, only exporting pollution from the first world to the third world. It's only one of many ways we create these walls, where those who consume and throw away do not see or feel the impact of it, or see the people who are left out of job opportunities and live precarious lives off of trash instead. Garbage mountains exist and grow and sustain waste picking communities due to our blindness to them. But this lack of sight is increasingly tenuous. Any path to meeting climate change commitments will have to include a plan to remediate garbage mountains. The Indian Prime Minister announced a several billion-dollar plan to remediate the mountains of garbage, as he called them, that dot the edges of most Indian cities weeks before the Glasgow conference in 2021 that addressed climate issues. In Deonar too, the municipality now has plans for a waste-to-energy plant, but not yet one that will shrink to more than 16 million metric tons of waste that already make the garbage mountains. The success of waste removal for city authorities is often seen by how quickly they can take it away from wealthy neighborhoods, away from the sight of wealthier residents. Their success is also measured by how well they guard it from waste pickers, how quickly they can reduce it to ash and turn it to bricks. A court case to close the garbage mountains has also stretched on for more than 2 decades, but addressed only how waste is to be reduced and not the lives that have hung in balance. It made me think of who cities are meant for and suggesting that waste policies must also take into account the impact of garbage mountains and incinerators on the life and health and quality of life of those who live around it, often the city's most vulnerable people. Vitabai and many of the others I wrote about in my book had only been able to afford lives in waste picking for their children and grandchildren. Her grandson Vicky has tried coloring his hair, accumulating nice clothes, learning a smattering of English words, but never been able to break away from waste picking on the Deonar garbage mountains, as has his father. Most other waste pickers featured in my book have suffered from tuberculosis or multiple drug-resistant tuberculosis. 2 of them died while writing the book. Others have asthma and other illnesses. Teenage pregnancy and infant mortality remain prevalent and high. Poverty has remained so endemic that these waste pickers have stayed at the bottom of Indian society, living off waste. Hardly any breaking away from it. While some have tried to enroll to be surrogate mothers, others have tried becoming professionals in the medical trial industry, only to return to waste picking. Again, this is not only the case in Mumbai. Garbage mountain avalanches have killed more than hundreds of waste pickers in Addis Ababa, Colombo, and elsewhere. Illegally dumped waste has led to a rise in cancer in Italy's Campania region, suggesting this is not only a third world problem, although waste pickers are seen more in developing countries. And so, the more I studied Deonar, I realized that waste management is not only about a technocratic solution with an environmental goal of clean air, but one that works towards creating more equitable cities and more equitable societies. And so with that, I'll leave it to George.
Saumya, thank you so much for giving the summary of your book. I thought it is so powerfully written, and it's such an important work. It's an important work because it engages with some crucial problems that the world is facing today. It's not just India. I mean, what I found, it is not just India, although we're describing the life in Deonar, Bombay, but it is also in the global south, the issues of poverty, pollution. It engages with the climate change, consumption, urbanization, and more significantly, all these important or the crucial problems that you narrate, you have narrated it through the lives of the poor, the marginalized, the waste pickers, the waste pickers in Deonar. When I started reading Deonar, because that's a place I stayed for 3 years, but not in this area that you described. I was at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, which is again in Devnar. So I had some kind of a connection, and I had seen these places, where this huge mountain that you describe had gone to travel around there. What I found also most significant about this book is it's an anthropological account in many sense. It's ethnographic, and more ethnographic than many anthropologists themselves do, because you have been going there for almost 8 to 9 years. Yeah, I think I learned that you started visiting the place in 2013. So it's been a very prolonged, long-term fieldwork that brought about the lives of these people, families, especially looking at children growing up there, getting married, as you said, they themselves becoming parents. So there is a whole stories of a life world, how that life world is being shaped in this garbage mountain. So in that sense, it is a very closely narrated ethnographic account, which I found very impressive. And also at the same time, the readers are able to connect with it because you bring out these realities very strongly. And another thing that kind of confronted me, and in a very powerful way, is here we have a big contradiction there. Contradiction is the waste. And the waste becomes, for many of the people, their lives, the waste becomes the hope. At least they want to claim it as a hope, thinking that going through this waste, garbage, they're trying to see whether they can find gold, whether they can find diamond. So a kind of a hope is entangled with waste, which is kind of comes out like a contradiction, very striking contradiction. And that hope never fulfills, but it ends up again hopelessness. Nobody has really, as you mentioned, no one really escaped that place. There is no social mobility there. There is no possibilities of better education, and they never get any other jobs. So therefore, the hope, the whole a false hope is built around waste. So it's for me, it was a kind of a big contradiction that sort of comes across very powerfully to the reader, and you brought it out so well, and that's very kind of a powerful way of narrating the story. I thought maybe, I don't know what would be the best way to go about. I make a few more comments, and then whether you would like to respond to each one, because it's usually we don't get a chance to talk to the author. So this is like, having read the book and now have the opportunity to speak to the author and know more about the book that perhaps not there are in the pages, or there are nuances that you would be able to share more. Therefore, we feel very lucky to have you here and then talk to you, to know more about some of the nuances and the complexities of writing this book. So I thought maybe I would make my comments on 3 aspects. One is on methodology. So I'll start with the methodology question first, and then a little bit about content. And third, a little bit about style, narrative style. And then a final question from an III perspective, Institute of Inequality perspective. I will have a final question. Now, you don't have to respond to all these comments if you feel, or you can take any that you find that you're most comfortable to speak about. I want to talk about the methodology first, because as I said, this is like an ethnographic work, that has been going on for almost 8 years. So therefore, you have come to know the people there so well. My question is in relation to speak a little bit about reflexivity Why is it? Because when we have such a close interaction with the people for a long time, it's like in anthropology, we say there is a relationship between field and the desk, mutually influencing each other. Desk is where you write, and the field is we have encountered all the people, having been there with the people. Now, after having been there with the people, now when you are here or when you are at your desk writing, so how did that relationship shape your writing? So what kind of a, how did you, because I do see in the book that you are there present at certain narrations, like you are present in the court, you are present in certain households there, talking to one of the main characters, Farzana. So you are sitting there on the floor with the people. So I see your presence there. No, more than that, would you also say how it has sort of shaped you, how it sort of shaped this relationship, prolonged relationship, shapes your writing? And what kind of, like when I also do field work, long-term field work with the Dalit communities and in the Maoist guerrilla zones and so on. So when you come back and start writing, a lot of interactions that I had with them, that shapes the way I write, that shapes the way, the ethics of my writing. So I would welcome you if you could share something about, from a reflexivity perspective, how did you engage with them, and how that relationship with them, relationality, reflects or mirrors in your writing. So that is one point. Yeah. And then once after this, perhaps I will ask more. Yeah.
Sure. So, I come from a journalistic background, so it's a little, there is always this tendency to write in third person, imagine as if these things were unfolding and you were not there. I often see journalists writing that, we write in third person in that passive sense, as if things were naturally unfolding and we just happen to write them down. But actually, I often argue that even as journalists, we need to accept that even by being there is a certain relationship. People don't forget that you were there. If you are in the home of a family, it's an enclosed space. Their relationship or whatever is unfolding is not entirely, you don't become invisible, or is not entirely divorced of your presence. Your presence in some way informs that, right? And by the same token, writing, while it feels like a very lonely process, when you interact and you do interviews, it's a very social process. You're always trying to get them to talk and to reflect, and you think that it's as if all those events are happening a second time when you're processing and you're writing them. And in some sense, it's a very lonely process, but in some ways they are there in your mind and they are affecting the way that you think. And one example I can give you of this is that when I speak to journalists, or I spoke to journalists, they would say a garbage mountain is a place of blight, a place that stinks, that smells, that is full of used things that we don't want to see and have anything to do with. But when I spoke to waste pickers, that is not how they presented the place. Because a person, like you talked about that sense of ephemeral hope, right? Like a child's childhood is also full of happy memories, wherever it might be. And so when I spoke to waste pickers, they had happy memories of this place. They remembered having birthday parties there. They remembered having found ice cream, having found treats, having made friends there, having had a life. And so when I began to write, I realized that while as an outsider, one may think of this as a place of blight, that through my interviews, in fact, through my long interaction with the waste pickers, it seemed to me that they were bringing light to a place of darkness, that they were bringing life to a place of blight, and that had to be included in this book, that it could not only be about while it is certainly true that there is a policy, a malaise that has kept this place going, which is, I don't mean to romanticize it and make it seem like a wonderful place, but it's also true that there was life there. And that interplay of life and blight had both to be brought out, because my interactions with waste pickers clearly suggested or showed that there was even a child's childhood there. There were happy memories there, that through their hard work, they were bringing life there. By being there every day, they were bringing life there. And so that interaction certainly informed the writing of the book. And I think that you feel it as you read it. And that interplay of life and light and darkness, I think, gave the book a particular character in my writing.
No, you definitely bring out that very well, because it is not just that depressive atmosphere there, but there is also a lot of life and agency and happiness, especially in families and so on, So therefore, I think, that aspect you brought out very well. I think that's very impressive. I also have a question regarding a comment on content, because as you said, it really brings out the family, the connection, the love, and so on. But sometimes I thought, would there be a possibility to, or maybe you could say now, why Muslims were, these were mostly Muslim households. And when it comes to also waste picking, it's always lower caste people who do that. So therefore, what kind of relationship between Muslims or lower caste communities there? Because I didn't hear much about the caste question emerging there, because waste is so much related to caste also, So therefore, was there any kind of interaction at that level? That's one question regarding inter-community relationship, Muslims versus Hindus there. And also the question of caste. How does it play around in that area? Then I also wanted to know a little more about, you have a lot of characters who are women, girls. And you also have families, where men. So what kind of among these group of families there, how did the gender play out there? In terms of patriarchy, because there is a question about Muharram Ali is the one who ran away from his wife and went with another young woman and then comes back and stays with his wife again. So there you find glimpses of all that. But in everyday interaction, everybody is picking garbage. So in terms of work, profession, or what they are doing, earning, so is there any gender relations or patriarchal ways of dealing with happens in a context like that? Mm-hmm. We know a lot of middle class patriarchy, we know a lot of village patriarchies, but this seemed to be a different setting altogether.
Yeah. So on the question of religion, at one point this place was populated by sending the city's pavement dwellers and street dwellers to live there, and so it was more mixed at one point. But after the riots in 1992, it became an increasingly Muslim area. It's known as one. In the city of Mumbai, it's known as an area where I think some surveys by the Tata Institute show that there are almost 85% Muslims who live around the edges of the Kavach Mountain. And coincidentally, I also found this to be the case in some other Kavach Mountains in India, including in Ahmedabad and I think Delhi and those kinds of places. Is there a caste element? Yes, of the people left there, they are belonging to certain castes, more belonging to the Dalit community, etc. But having said that, there are not too many Hindus left there anymore. The riots were pretty severe there in 1992, and after that, the Hindus who could leave left, and this became an increasingly Muslim area, and their families came to live there, and up from the city, but also from elsewhere in the country, they came to live there, and So this just became an increasingly Muslim area. So that's one. How does patriarchy play out? As you said, there are women picking, there are men picking. But having said that, I would say that that certainly was an aspect of like Farzana's life, for example. We do see that her brother did not want her to work there. And so, I mean, she has a certain agency, she continues to work there, but he has a strong presence in her life. There is an incident in the book where she says that he would slash her with his belt if he found her there. So while you could say that it was a wonderful thing that he wanted her to stay in school and not to be waste picking, there was certainly a certain sense of power that he exercised over her. When she gets married also, you see her, I don't romanticize life on the garbage mountains, but by the same token, you see a certain power that the husband exercises over her. Mm-hmm. So while yes, it's true, women are working, men are working, these are not necessarily women who cover their heads and stay at home. They don't have the luxury to do that. That in fact, poverty is making them do some of the most difficult jobs, including you see Yasmin, who works in medical trials, women who try to be surrogate mothers, those kinds of things. It does make them do all kinds of things. This is not a very protected life. But by the same token, do we see the men influencing and exerting certain kinds of power over the women? Yes, you do.
Yeah. Shalini, I'm sure a lot of questions will be there, but can I ask one final question?
Yes.
Yeah, this is from the perspective of like at the International Inequalities Institute, we are all studying various forms of inequalities. And all our effort is when we study this, it's not just knowledge building. Knowledge building is part of it, but we also want to see how we can transform inequalities through our writings or our engagements. So we want, increasingly there is an importance given to impacting, transforming inequalities and so on. So I was wondering, a book like this, it is non-fiction, so it's based on fact, lot of it's all factual basically. So how would you see an impact of a book like this in terms of people who were living on this garbage mountain, and also elsewhere, people struggling to meet to ends meet, in such precarious conditions? Or is it just out there only as a novel or a creative nonfiction work? How do you envisage the impact of this work?
Yeah, sure. As I mentioned, I come from a journalistic background, and so I feel writing is a response in itself. Researching, writing, putting information out there in readable ways, actually putting information out in the public domain for people to read and to know. My book is not so much prescriptive as it encourages readers to introspect, to think. It's not like it's not only a book about policy, but it's something that makes us think about life itself, which is essentially what journalists do and what writers do, which is to make us think, which is to make us it's to put, as journalists, we always our intention is always to put information out and encourage readers to interact with it, to think in new ways, to look at problems in new ways. And I hope that I'm actually putting it out there for policymakers, for researchers, for academics to, and I think there's actually a body of work now on waste where people are putting this kind of this very human face to it, a policy face to it. How does policy impact people, and the most vulnerable people? And I think that in reading, in putting it out itself, in putting information that was not out there, throwing light on something that was more intangible, itself something has changed. So that really is my intention. And I also very quickly wanted to address this issue that you brought up right at the beginning of this ephemeral hope of entangled with garbage that people, I think it was also a microcosm of our country at that point itself, like of social mobility, where people felt that yes, garbage could transform their lives, but actually that hope of social mobility is a somewhat more ephemeral one that one would hope. I met so many waste pickers who knew somebody who had found gold, who knew somebody who had who thought they knew somebody who had gotten wealthy and moved out. But actually none of the characters in this book moved out except two who died and one who went to jail. So this idea, they're always looking for jobs, they're always looking for better jobs, but I hardly see any of them. That hope of jobs in shining India is not really available to people like this. At least that's what I saw in my research.
Well, thank you, Saumya. Thank you so much for giving us more nuanced understanding of the book with this discussion. Thank you. Over to Shalini.
Thank you. That was absolutely wonderful, Saumya. And thank you so much, George, for such insightful questions. I'm now going to open the floor to the Q&A. So, please raise the hand function, the raise hand function, or put your comments on the chat and I'll collect the questions, whatever you want. Yes, Shiko. Shiko, please.
Hi, Saumya. Thank you so much for that. That was very, very nice. So I have I have to confess that I have unfortunately not yet read the book. I will read it. But I have a question, and maybe you address it there. And if you don't, maybe you can tell us about it now. And that is whether there's any attempt by the government of Mumbai or Maharashtra or whoever to have policy interventions of any kind in this context to try and help the people who live there. Is there any, do the people who live there, these Muslim families, do they ever see an intervention or an attempt by policymakers to do something for them? And if so, how do they work, or how effective are they, or what challenges are they to them? Thanks.
Yeah, sure. There are attempts. There is a, just last week I read in the newspaper that this municipal ward is going to be taken up as a part of the Mumbai Climate Action Plan. And I chronicle in great detail how these different kinds of plans have been made. The plans are more related to reduction of waste than to what is happening to these people. But there have been some plans with regard to what is to happen in this ward. But I would say, so I would not say that there are no plans, but I would certainly say that it is an underserved ward. And also that there is a disconnect between public discourse and what reaches this ward. So even as a part of my research, when I would read, public functionaries. If you talk to public functionaries, they'll tell you, oh, there's water in every single house. Even now, if you were to go on YouTube, you'll find speeches by all of these people saying, oh, there's water in every house, there's toilets for every whatever 5 or 10 people. But actually, I would say that of the characters in my book, not a single one has water in their house, not a single one has a toilet in their house. So there is a disconnect between public discourse and the way people experience it. There are a large number of schools, but it's also the highest dropout rate in the world because poverty keeps them from attending schools and staying in schools. So certainly there is some attempt, but there is a disconnect between the public discourse on outreach and what actually is available on the ground.
Should I take the opportunity to ask you something, Saumya?
Sure.
Yeah. Well, I really loved your talk. It gave us a really wonderful sense of, like you said, mountains as symbols of inequality and exclusion in shining India. I think what I like most about your book, I've read bits and I have to admit, I have to read the whole thing. was that, you have so much empathy, and you sort of, you work on deconstructing stereotypes. So I think it was really nice the way that, you just don't talk about the apathy, but you talk about the sociality that goes on and the sense of belongingness. There's an identity and a sense of belongingness, even though people's lives are very precarious and very difficult. So I really like that aspect. And this differs from things like Slumdog Millionaire and, those kind of movies that we've seen, because it's got really strong empathy. I have a few questions, and they're also related to, the more anthropological sort of, setting in which I think you've conducted your field work. Like George says, you are almost, it has the same kind of method. So one is that you're a journalist, and I'm wondering how that went down, because whenever I've done field work, journalists are just held with so much suspicion, and so much, they're not sort of, there's just so much a discourse of suspicion. What are you going to do with this? What is this material going to be used for, etc. So obviously you were there for many years and you broke this, barrier, but I'd like to hear more about fieldwork, long-term fieldwork undertaken by a journalist. Second is this notion of upward social mobility, which even George raised. In my fieldwork, which was on Balmikis and the sweeper caste, the reason why there was no upward social mobility and why they wanted to remain sweepers was because ultimately they would inherit their parents' jobs, which are long-term, secure government municipal jobs. So you never really want to move anywhere else because you're going to get a permanent job. So, or you change your caste, you try and, move into different castes. So yeah, it seems here that the door is very much closed here to a type of social mobility that is simply not taking place. And then finally, because I work on marriage, what about exogamy? Can you intermarry in these, do people intermarry in the slums? Can you marry a neighbor, or because you can't do that in many places because of the rule of exogamy? Okay, so I leave it to you there.
To your first question on when my entry into the community, the way I knew them was through my foundation. So at first I would go there just out of curiosity to know what is this place, are my loans going to go bad? And so for years I was going there for a different purpose. But when I did begin to think of writing, say, a magazine article, which is what I thought it would be at first, I made it clear to them that, this is not, there's not money at the end of this. In fact, we stopped lending to some people, and that this is now for an interview, and at some point something will be written about you, but I don't know what form it's going to take, just so that they know that this interview, it's sort of informed consent, if I may use that word, that they knew what they were being spoken for and what this information was going to be used for. So at some point, yes, when it stretched into years, they were a little bit frustrated, like, when is this going to appear? And you're endlessly interviewing us and checking and rechecking the same things to make sure that it's right, like we told you this one time. So I did have pre-existing relationships with them when I thought of writing about them, but by the same token, they knew the project that they were involved in, and they very much participated by sharing photographs, sharing videos. When I began and I told one of the older waste pickers that this is what I wanted to do, she would tell me, you should bring a video. Nobody's going to believe, if you just say in words how our life is, people are not going to believe it. People are not going to understand what our lives are like. So they participated in every way. They continue to participate in whatever way they can in this whole project of bringing their lives to light. So that's about my interaction with them. You asked about Valmiki's. Yes, you're absolutely right. This has been my experience as well. The so-called sweepers employed by the city to sweep city streets actually belong to a similar caste from Gujarat, if not the same caste. And they overwhelmingly form the sweepers in the city who are on municipal rolls. And so they have relative security. Yes, they pass it on to their children. So in that community, I've actually encountered children who have of sweepers who have an education. They may have a college education, but want to continue to work in these jobs because there is a certain job security. They may get a house. They may get certain benefits, and also they can pass it on to their children. And so that stays within, those jobs stay within those families, those communities, and they also don't want to do anything else. By contrast, these are very informal jobs that you see on the garbage mountain. In fact, these are people who are seen as interlopers. They are to be, this is a municipal area, it's a secure area, they are not meant to be here. They are encroaching on the city's trash, which is to be protected, and so they could be beaten, they could be arrested, they could be detained. So this is a very different, a very insecure life as compared to that of Valmiki's. And your third question was relating to marriage. As I said, like, the religious makeup of this has now become so skewed that largely, who are your neighbors now? They are more likely to be Muslims than they are Hindus. But by the same token, do I see intermarriage? Yes. Do I see some Hindus married to Muslims among different castes, different parts of the country, different kinds of people? Yes, for sure. I do see that. I also wanted to very quickly go back to Dr. Figueroa's question, which was that you would think that democratic institutions like elected representatives, etc., would be able to respond to development issues in a place like this. But in fact, I do feel that the somewhat religious ghettoization, to use that word, has prevented that in a way from happening. Like Mumbai has what is called Asia's wealthiest municipality. They have a budget of something like 35,000 crores, which, if you think that just one ward, it would not be so difficult to address developmental concerns in that ward. But maybe one reason that doesn't happen is that for 20 or 30 years, it is the Shiv Sena and the BJP that have controlled the municipality of the city. But these particular seats, because of the religious makeup, go to the Samajwadi Party. And so it's a particular party that's only in this area because of the religious makeup of this area. The riots were strong here. So over a period of time, there is a certain ghettoization of this area. It has become an enclave of its own, where development needs are addressed more in word than in action. I think, given the outcomes over a period of time, that would be fair to say that you don't see development reaching there as much on the ground. And this could be one reason.
Okay, thank you, Saumya. I think there's a question by Divakar. Are you there?
Yes, thanks, Shalini.
Okay.
Thanks a lot, Saumya. This was wonderful. My question was with regards to sort of the generic topic and the people who cover this topic. So, poor in Bombay have been written about fairly extensively relative to poor in the rest of the country, and this kind of research is also sort of celebrated with regards to the poor in Bombay, right? So with like Shantaram sort of exploding, and then ever since, you also have Catherine Booz behind The Beautiful Forever. Well, she talks about drag pickers a lot in her book, your book, and all of these sort of non-fiction work has been celebrated across board. While simultaneously, there, at least as a frequent visitor to Bombay, I feel like there is significant apathy to the lives of the people that that are celebrated in these nonfiction work. So I was wondering, as a journalist who writes about it, who has seen other journalists write about it, what kind of shift do you hope to have with your work? And if not this work, what do you think will bring about that shift? Sort of a political shift or a social shift that brings about a change in the lives of these people, a significant change in our lives, or the lives of the future generation.
Yeah, no, to be very honest, I don't look at it as a journalist's remit or a writer's remit to bring change. I feel that the way in which to change lives or, that kind of thing. But I think that we bring change just from the fact that we shed light on something. Just from the fact that something that was unseen is now seen, right? By showing how policy works. One way in which my book is a little bit different from some of the books that you talk about is that it does go into policy a lot. It does talk about how democratic processes impact people. And so I took this unusual step almost of intertwining the narration of the lives of waste pickers with that of this court case, as well as with the functioning of the municipality. Because sometimes, in popular discourse, there is this tendency either to romanticize the poor, or even sometimes to show them as being poor of their own volition, that, oh, they're just lazy and they live like this and this is the only life that they know. But in fact, there are strong policy failings or delays that cause this poverty, that are an endemic cause of this poverty, which also needs to be written about. And as writers, we should not be afraid to write about these policy gaps and failings and people stuck as a result of this, that this is not an inanimate policy, but something that really holds people like this down. And so I talked about this court case that has been going on for 26 years. And I attended more than 300 hours of court proceedings, at the end of which the lives of the waste pickers are exactly as they were. The court case is going on. The garbage mountains are unmoved. So the idea was also to show, or for example, this waste to energy plant, which they have been planning for almost 2 decades, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. It's also an ephemeral hope. And now the plant is supposed to come in 2023, and it will be a somewhat smaller plant, but it is now supposed to come in 2023. And I trace the history of this going back more than 2 decades. So what are the policy interventions and the gap of those interventions that these people's lives are stuck in? And in showing the working of policy or the delays in it, and these people stuck in it, I do hope that we are shedding light on something that was unseen. And in doing so, we are furthering discourse. We are encouraging people to think and rethink. I don't think that as journalists, our aim is to change lives, but to put information, to show something that was not seen. Also to create empathy for people who seem very different from us. This book is being released in many different countries and places that seem very different from our own from our lives, and yet it shows those connections, that their lives are not so different from ours, that these lives are created by ours also. For instance, one reason I wrote this book was that in 2016, there were fires on the Garbage Mountain, huge fires. And police cases were being made out against what was called unidentified children waste pickers between 8 and 10 years old. So the whole allegation was that waste pickers are lighting fires on these garbage mountains, which they may or may not have done. But in fact, we created this place that was so combustible. So much waste lying there is bound to be combustible. And so it encouraged us to introspect and to rethink about our own lives.
Thank you, Saumya. Are there any more questions? I think, Saumya, we'll end it there now. It's been totally fantastic. It's been a pleasure for me to chair today's events. Thank you to Saumya, thank you to George, thank you to all of you who joined, asked questions. It's been a wonderful afternoon. If you'd like to hear more about the LSE III events and seminars, etc., please follow the link in the chat function to learn about our events every Tuesday, and sign up to the fortnightly newsletter as well. So until we meet again, virtually or otherwise, thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
All right, Saumya. Bye-bye. Take care.